topic of Swadeshi, I think Swadeshi, Swadharma, Swaraj, Swavalamban, all these are an integrated package. And you cannot take out one from the other and define the rest, or you can't take the hair out of the elephant and define the elephant, as they would say. Now, every country, in my view, has a soul. Every country has a soul, and it defines that nation, the nationhood, the people, and their common aspirations. I come from a totally different part of the country than most of you here. I come from the southernmost side. I come from Tamil Nadu, and I see that in a continent like Europe, a Punjabi or an Assamese would be from two different nations. But in this great land of ours, I can sympathize, empathize, culturally connect. So language may be a barrier, but culturally I can connect with anybody from, say, Kashmir to Kanyakumari, Kohima to Kandla with ease. With I don't have to labor on anything. I just have to connect with a proper language. That's all. Now, if you dwell on the soul of India, every nation also has a soul. It is not only India has a soul. Ancient nations like Japan, like America, like Britain, all these countries have some sort of a soul, and on the soul on which the entire nationhood is built up. Now, the Japanese word for their soul, the soul of Japan, is titled Bushido. That means the honor of men, of knighthood, and it is the highest class of behavior. The cultural behavior that the Japanese would like to be linked to is Bushido. Likewise, if you go to America and talk to an American and talk to American about the soul of America, it is the fundamental human rights or the individual rights. Rights are non-alienable, non-negotiable as far as the Americans are concerned. कुछ भी दे देंगे, लेकिन rights नहीं छोड़ेंगे. Rights is ultimate for them. And it is the basis on which people like Madison have created the American Constitution. American Constitution is premised on one man can do anything. That is the fundamental rights on which the entire Constitution of America has been premised. But if you come to, say, a country like India, ours will be exactly the opposite of the American way of life. We believe in duties. That is why anybody from Punjab would connect to me if I say Karmani Vadikarasya. I don't have to labor much. I do have to say it is my duty, and duty is what will sustain me. And that, I would say, is what links me culturally to anybody in Kanyakumari to Kashmir, from Assam to Gujarat or to Kottayam. You call any place, we are all linked by only one language or one idea of culture, and that culture is rooted to duties. Now, madam, when you gave a brief introduction, you did talk about restraints. Culture is all about restraints. Culture is all about living within yourself, seeing to that you don't hurt others. And we believe that a duty for a duty will sustain the civilization. Whereas the West believes a right for a right is what will sustain their civilization or their constitution or their mechanism of public order, public life, whatever you may call it. Now, when we call this duty is a part of a larger package, and that is Swaraj. And we have always linked ourselves to this grand idea of duty. It is not embedded right from the Gita. In fact, Bhagavad Gita is probably putting across the entire issue in a very compact form. But ideally, if you look at it, the ideas of duties permeated or of a prehistoric origin, and predated even the ideas of rights embedded in the Bhagavad Gita. So we are civilizationally rooted to duty, and this duty is part of a four-pronged attack, what I would say, to ourselves. That is Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha. All we call as Purushartha. And this way of performing or attaining moksha, which will be the ultimate salvation. There is no English equivalent of moksha or dharma in English language. So I'm compelled to use the nearest word, which is salvation. Salvation is not moksha. Moksha is what we try to achieve through artha, kama, in a dharmic way, dharma, and then moksha. So there is no order between artha, kama, dharma. But the final goal is moksha. And if that is the soul of every individual, the soul of the nation is also collectivized through this process of artha, dharma, kama, moksha. Now, we are celebrating our 75th year of our Azadi, of our great country. But as a nation, as a civilization, we are probably 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old. We don't know how long we are because we have not yet invented the appropriate mechanics for finding out how old we are. We have only come to a conclusion that we are probably some older civilization. But this older civilization had a new constitution, and this new constitution, which was where we were promised Ramarajya, where we were promised Swaraj, was written premised on Western ideas of rights. This is a huge conflict. Now I would put it this way, that as lawyers, when we start reading the Constitution, the first article of the Constitution of India reads, India, that is Bharat, and goes on to explain so many things. Now, no other nation would be having called by a twin name. Japan is Japan, America is America, Spain is Spain, France is France. But when it comes to India, the forefathers, our forefathers and the founding fathers of the Constitution had this great debate within the Constituent Assembly, whether this great ancient civilization should be called as Bharat, representing its traditional civilizational name, or whether it should be represented by the modern name called India. When we take Sankalpa, when we go to any temple, we said Bharata Varshe, Bharatakante, Meroho, Varahe, so many things. We put the geographical, we take the time, we take everything as a Sankalpa. But when we come outside of the temple and we deal with the secular matters, we instantly become Indians, and consequently, we have a twin personality. We are Bharatiyas when we are civilizational, we are Indians when we are constitutional. And the logical next step is, we are duty-bound when we are Bharatiyas, we are right-based when we are Indians. So we are suffering from what I call as a split personality disorder. We are in search of our own people, our own ideas, our own ideologies. That is why after 75 years, we are still finding what is this Swadeshi, what is this Swaraj, what is this Swavalamban, what is this Swadharma. We are still yet agitated on what actually cost us to survive this 1,000, 10,000, 15,000 years of civilizational without a break. Though politically we had a huge setback for the last 1,000 years, but we are civilizationally intact. So what is our strength? We are still like Hanumanji standing at Kanyakumari, not knowing what is the strength, what is our own strength. So it may require a Jambavan to come and tell us that these are our strengths. Our strengths are our Swadeshi, our strengths are our Swavalambar, the individual dignity that we talk about. But mostly all these are based on duties. So a right-based constitution is at loggerhead with a duty-based civilization. So the first and foremost thing, and it is very strange that in 1976, when the country was facing emergency, Mrs. Gandhi introduced, the then Prime Minister introduced Part 4A of the Constitution, leading to introduction of Article 51, capital A, which talks about duties. But those duties are neither justiciable nor enforceable in a court of law. It has no values except that they are like a charter of a Lions Club, that हम ये करेंगे वो करेंगे, but कौन करेगा कैसे करवाएगा इसकी कोई बात ही नहीं हुई. In other words, the Constitution of India, right from Article 1 to its soul, is completely diverged from the civilizational ethos of this country. And there is a reason for that also. In 1947 to 1949, when we wrote the Constitution was written during that period of tumultuous period of independence. More than 1 million Indians were massacred. We lost more than probably 10 million people also, as per some estimates. And those were the times when the Constitution was written. We were undergoing, sorry for my language, but it was a bloody partition. And we lost huge amount of territory. Our brothers and sisters, especially our sisters, underwent one of the most traumatic periods of partition. And I'm conscious that I'm speaking in Punjab to people basically from Punjab who faced the most horrific periods in 1940s in the events leading to the partition. But constitutionally, we also were under tremendous pressure between shifting from an old order to a new order, and the new order was representative of an older order, or should we continue the existing order of the British so that to avoid chaos? This was the question. We chose order over chaos. We said we will not rewrite the Constitution as per our civilizational ethos, but we will write the Constitution. And there is no word called Swadeshi. There is nothing called Swaraj. There is nothing to even remotely associate ourselves with Swavalamban or Swadharma. And we wrote a constitution which was in 1947 a rehash of the 1935 British Act of Government of India Act. Of course, we added the fundamental rights, everything. And these fundamental rights, I need to dwell on this a bit. The 16th century, 17th century political thinkers, when we're talking about the nation state in Europe, in various parts of Europe and other places, invariably, people like Thomas Hobbes, Rousseau, were all considered as great political thinkers who brought about the idea that we need to look about as to how a constitution has to be made of a country, premise their view that humans are bad. In fact, Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan in 1651 goes on to state that man is brutish, selfish, and he needs to be tamed. Once you make this fundamental assumption that man is brutish, you start with a constitution and creation of an order and a state which is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. And once you created an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient state, you found that even for a slap or a minor fisticuff, the state could hang you or decapitate you. So then the whole idea of fundamental rights came about. To counterbalance the omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient state, we created the idea of fundamental rights, which the great Palkiwala expounded so brilliantly during emergency, as we all know, in the Kesavan and the Bharati case. I did not go into it, but I have a larger submission here. The submission stems from the fact that this idea that man is brutish, man is selfish, man is cruel, is basically a Christendom thought. And in Christianity, all men, including the Pope, is born bad, is a born sinner. Unlike us, we see divinity in every individual. The Christendom believes everybody is a born sinner, and that is because Adam and Eve created the first sin, and subsequent generations are carrying forward that sin irrespective of the fact they were not Adam and Eve in their pre-janma or the previous birth. So the whole idea is to get rid of the sin. You require an external agent called Christ. And that external agent will ensure that the sinner in you will be cleansed, and then only you are available for salvation. So without baptism, without adhering to Christ and Christian theology, there is no salvation possible. Even you may be the best person on earth. You may be the best, most charitable, noble soul. Even then, you are a born sinner. Even without you doing anything, you are already having a debit balance. To remedy the debit balance, the only way is to have a credit balance by surrendering yourself to Christ and attaining Christian salvation through Christ. This thought, according to James Boyce, one of the most brilliant researchers about Christian theology, who has written a book titled The Born Bad and How It Has Influenced Modern Thinking in probably 2011. He says not only Thomas Hobbes, it is Karl Marx in case of political economy, or it is Richard Dawkins in case of evolution biology, or Sigmund Freud in case of human psychology. All these hold individuals to be bad, and you require an external agent to do the job. And that is how Thomas Hobbes also believed that you are bad and you require an omnipotent, omnipresent state. It is the same formula repeated in discipline after discipline after discipline, whether it is Adam Smith in a case of economics, or whether it is Dawkins, Sigmund Freud, or whether it is Karl Marx or Thomas Hobbes or Rousseau. You take the great political thinkers, the storyline is one and the same. But are we born bad? Is the presumption that every Indian born bad is civilizationally, culturally suited to our idea of Swaraj? Now, does this constitution ideally talk about Swaraj? Do we subscribe to the fact that we are all born bad? In fact, we believe in salvation, or what we call as moksha, through only our own performance of our own duties. In fact, Mahabharata's original name is Jaya. Jaya means victory over self. Vijaya means victory over others. Jaya is what we always achieve, and Mahabharata's original name is Jaya. And we believe that as a civilization, we can elevate ourselves by our own duties, our own civilization values, our own temperament, our own swadharma, our own performance of various acts. And our Swaraj is also intertwined with the Swaraj of the country, on which the political Swaraj is a very important one, but not the overarching one. I repeat, this is very important. My Swaraj is as important as the political Swaraj, but political Swaraj is not my Swaraj. We have attained political Swaraj in 1947, no doubt about it. But have we elevated people? Have we given them the freedom, the type of Swaraj that our forefathers thought about, the freedom fighters thought about? Where we promised a constitution that was secular, where we promised a constitution where the state would be the driver of the economy, where we promised a socialist order. In fact, Ambedkar makes a very scathing attack about saying that we must be a socialist, of socialist persuasion, economically speaking, when Nehru puts in this idea. Nehru wanted this nation to be a socialist country. This was in 1947, 48. In the Constituent Assembly debates, it is there. So Ambedkar makes a fervent plea and says we cannot be a socialist one. But what did we do? We smuggled the word socialism in 1975 into the preamble of the Constitution, even without a debate. And what was rejected explicitly by voting in the Constituent Assembly debate finds its way into the Constitution without a debate either in the Constituent Assembly or in the Parliament, and we are all become socialists. The net effect of it is we have become too dependent on the state. We have become, instead of the classical idea. In fact, in my book, Retaining Balance, I argue that Rama Rajya is less of Lord Rama and more of Rajya, where Rajya or the government is basically a residuary one. It is not the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent one like the Westerners think, but we are basically, we believe in a residuary state. A state where the people do their duties. In fact, in Kambaramayan, we believe in Tamil, the great Kambaramayan, where we believe that Rama Rajya extended for 11,000 years. And in those 11,000 years, according to experts, there was not even one natural calamity. That was because of the respect given to environment. There was not even one case where the father had to lift the peer of the son. That was the extent to which order prevailed. It may be hypothetical, it may be a poet's imagination. I am not going into those things. But the concept was that Ram Rajya was not where Rama would do everything, and people in Ram Rajya, I'm sorry, people in Ram Rajya were supinely indifferent and were hoping for the government to do everything, yojana after yojana after yojana. This was not the idea of Swarajya. This is not the idea of Ram Rajya. This was not the idea propelled by, say, somebody like Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, there is one Mr. Agarwal who has written a book titled Gandhi's Idea of Constitution. It's a brilliant, though Gandhiji has written only the foreword for it, he has not agreed to write his own constitution. Agarwal's book represents what should be the constitution as prescribed by, say, Mahatma Gandhi and his thoughts. And those are all the thoughts which died on 30th January 1948 after the assassination of Gandhi. The constitution jettisoned the ideas of Gandhism. Not that I'm saying that Gandhi's idea are sacrosanct, it has to be adopted. I'm only saying that Gandhi's idea need to be debated. Tilak's idea of Swaraj needs to be debated. Tilak's idea of Swaraj was far ahead of its times. And there is a book in 1956 written by an American scholar, I forget his name. And he wrote in 1956 that Lokmanya, the title of the book is Lokmanya. And he says Lokmanya was ahead of his times. Unfortunately, the framers of the constitution have written a constitution predominantly which is nothing to do with Indian ethos and have begged, borrowed and stolen from the British constitution or the British way of or the unwritten constitution or the Western thinking. There is nothing Indian, he says. Why do I say all these things now? That the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is not only a time for celebration, it is a time for introspection. It is a time to not only look at pride at what we have achieved in the last 75 years, and we have achieved significantly. We need not feel squeamish about it. We need to celebrate it. But it is a time to also introspect. And now that we are in far better position internally and externally, to see whether we have to bring in fundamental amendments to the Constitution, like introducing fundamental duties in Part 3 of the Constitution, a justiciable part, whether the Constitution has to devolve to a far more lower level than what it believes. Federalism doesn't mean that it should stop with states. Federalism must go up to the Gram Panchayats. And we need to devolve the Constitution. We have to relook into the devolution mechanism of taxes. Whether law and order should be a state subject or a central subject. These are all issues that we need to go about. This is not a lecture about how to rework it. It's only an idea that I'm planting within an august audience, knowing fully well that this is a celebratory one. But at the same time, I want to also introspect. A celebration must also result in introspection. And the introspection must lead, probably in the next 25 years, to a complete rehaul of the Constitution. And a Constitution that is written on the basis that India is a dharmic civilization. We are a civilization, we are a dharmic civilization. And that is the soul of this country. This is why I refer to Bushido, I refer to the rights, American rights in the American Constitution. Ours is not a rights-based civilization, we are a duty-based civilization. We have to bring about this once again. We have to capture the spirit all over once again. It is no longer merely by slogans. A slogan this way or a slogan that way is not going to take us far. On the contrary, we need to bring about a situation where we talk about basic civilizational ethos that is constitutionally done. And the first thing we did a definition about the state in Article 12. But what is the state all about? Should it come and should it give you anything and everything? Should it be something that it is the provider of everything and anything at the first instance? Or should it be a residuary state? Now there are constitutions like the Mexican one. In fact, now I am embarking on a study of comparative analysis of various constitutions which are duty-based. There are Mexican constitution, which says that it will be the duty of the parent to ensure that you will provide basic education to your children. Now here we have converted into a basic right and said that right to education is your right. See the fundamental difference. Why should it be a right when a parent has to produce to children? It is also their duty to see that the children are educated. Lastly, I will complete with only one important thing, that in 1948, when the UN was formed and it was talking about Human Rights Commission, and in 1946 or 47, a year or two prior to that, Julian Huxley, the then director of UNHRC, wrote a letter to Mahatma Gandhi asking him that why don't you write a monograph for our organization on human rights. Mahatma Gandhi quotes Hind Swaraj and he says, 1908 or 9, when I wrote Hind Swaraj, I believed that there is no rights without corresponding duties. And he says the same thing I learned not from anybody, but my illiterate but wise mother. Now, all of us have mothers who may be illiterate, who may be literate. That is entirely different. But most of our mothers are completely wise because they are civilizationally rooted. And this conflict between duty and right, was also captured in a conference in Bogota in 1945 or 46. And they prescribed duties for both the state and the individual. And unfortunately, Bogota conference, by the time it ended, the draft was changed. And even the duties for the government was given a go by. And only the duty of the individual survived. And even that Bogota conference was given a decent burial by the time the UNHRC came. And once it came to UNHRC, the American model prevailed. The American model is one of rights. After World War, every constitution written has more or less mirrored the soul with that of the American soul. And they have jettisoned their own Swadeshi soul. The Swadeshi soul or the Swaraj soul is the soul of India. It is the soul of India. It is unfortunately not available today within the constitution, though civilizationally at our homes it is available. It is time to legitimize ourselves as a civilizational state. It is time to declare ourselves that we are not merely a sovereign republic. We are also a civilization. We are a civilizational state. We are also must make a declaration that our Swaraj is not only political Swaraj. Our Swaraj is also far deep-rooted and far more multidimensional, and it involves Swaraj for the individuals. And that Swaraj is what can be arrived at only through a duty conscious individual and a duty conscious society, and for which we need to re-emphasize and redesign the constitution based on Swaraj, which is also encompasses the duties of the individual. It goes back and forth. One side it is duty, and the other side it is liberation. And you can't have liberation of the individual in the Indian context, in the Bharatiya context, without providing the Swaraj at the individual level, without taking care of the duties. Likewise, you can't talk about duties alone without leading to individual Swaraj. So both these things are sadly missing in our constitution. I only hope the scholars here who are far more into academia and into far more research will provide a greater platform, greater impetus. I must thank all the people involved here and also the Punjab University for making this wonderful occasion, may provide me a platform. Today, I'm not in India, I'm outside of India, but despite the time differences, I could, thanks to Bharat Gopu, I was compelled to be here and he accommodated me despite all the time differences to make this lecture. And in case any one of you feel that there is something that we can work through on this, I'm willing to work through, because this is the next 25-year agenda for ahead of us. Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav should also mean more duty, more responsibility for each of us collectively and at an individual level. And I hope that all of us will partner with each other and give a wonderful constitution in the next 25 years that would reflect the civilizational basis and civilizational ethos of this great nation. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
So thanks, Dr. M.R. Venkatesh ji, for me, for our students, because most of us are doing a traditional kind of history, and you have given us some pointers. And the main pointer for, I think, for us and for researchers and even for teachers is this, that one has to understand the soul of our civilization, which is more duty bound. So I hope with this key take, we can move forward and come up with work for the research. So thanks for your insight, and that is very relevant for us, that it is not just a few months of celebration, but a next 25 years of vision, the way we should move ahead. So thanks once again.